If you were literally founding a new company from scratch with the same mission, how would you execute on that mission using a fully AI native approach? If you can't, then you should find a buyer. And then if you really care about this mission, like go and start the next carnation of it.
For people that work for you, how have you adjusted what you expect of them to help them be successful?
If you want to cancel all your meetings for like a day or for an entire week and just go play around with every AI product that you think could be relevant to Airtable, go do it.
Of the different functions on a product team, PM, engineering, design, who has had the most success being more productive with these tools?
It really does become more about individual attitude. There's a strong advantage to any of those three roles who can kind of cross over into the other two. As a PM, you need to start looking more like a hybrid PM prototyper who has some good design sensibilities.
Do you see one of these roles being more in trouble than others?
Today, my guest is Howie Liu. Howie is the co-founder and CEO of Airtable. I'm having a bunch of conversations on this podcast with founders who are reinventing their decade-plus-old business in this AI era to help you navigate this existential transition that every company and product is going through right now. Howie and Airtable's journey is an incredible example of this, and there's so much to learn from what Howie shares in this conversation. We talk about a very interesting trend that I've noticed that Howie is very much an example of CEOs almost becoming individual contributors again, getting into the code, building things, leading initiatives themselves. That's something that we call the ICCO. We also talk about the very specific skills that he believes product managers and product leaders, also engineers and designers, need to build to do well in this new world that we're in. Also, how he restructured his company into two groups, a fast-thinking group and a slow-thinking group, which allowed their AI investments to significantly accelerate. If you're struggling to figure out how to be successful in this new AI era, this episode is for you. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it in your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. Also, if you become an annual subscriber of my newsletter, you get a year free of 15 incredible products, including Lovable, Replit, Bolt, N8N, Linear, Superhuman, Descript, Whisperflow, Gamma, Perplexity, Warp, Granola, Magic Patterns, Raycast, ChatPRD, and Mobbit. Check it out, lennysnewsletter.com, and click Product Pass. With that, I bring you Howie Liu. This episode is brought to you by LucidLink, the storage collaboration platform. You've built a great product, but how you show it through video, design, and storytelling is what brings it to life. If your team works with large media files, videos, design assets, layered project files, you know how painful it can be to stay organized across locations. Files live in different places, you're constantly asking, is this the latest version? Creative work slows down while people wait for files to transfer. LucidLink fixes this. It gives your team a shared space in the cloud that works like a local drive. Files are instantly accessible from anywhere. No downloading, no syncing, and always up to date. That means producers, editors, designers, and marketers can open massive files in their native apps, work directly from the cloud, and stay aligned wherever they are. Teams at Adobe, Shopify, and top creative agencies use LucidLink to keep their content engine running fast and smooth. Try it for free at lucidlink.com/Lenny. That's LUCIDLINK.com/Lenny. Today's episode is brought to you by DX, the developer intelligence platform designed by leading researchers. To thrive in the AI era, organizations need to adapt quickly. But many organization leaders struggle to answer pressing questions like, which tools are working? How are they being used? What's actually driving value? DX provides the data and insights that leaders need to navigate this shift. With DX, companies like Dropbox, Booking.com, Adyen, and Intercom get a deep understanding of how AI is providing value to their developers and what impact AI is having on engineering productivity. To learn more, visit DX's website at getdx.com/Lenny. That's getdx.com/Lenny. Howie, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited. Thank you, Lenny. I've been a listener from afar for a while now.
I'm really flattered to hear that. I'm also very excited. You've been on quite a journey over the last, is it 13 years? Is it longer?
Right about 13.
13 years. I imagine there have been a lot of ups and a lot of downs. I want to talk about all those things. I want to talk about a lot of the lessons that you've learned along the way. I want to start with what I imagine was a very surprising down moment in the history of Airtable. This is something that, unfortunately, is something I think about when I think of Airtable. I feel other people maybe feel this way. Is there's this tweet that went super viral, maybe a couple years ago at this point, where someone just shared all his data and they're like, Airtable is dead. they've raised way more money than they're worth. They're not making enough to get underwater.
Yeah.
Airtable, RIP. What happened there? How much of that was true? How did that go?
Yeah. So basically none of it was true. The surprising thing to me was how viral this tweet went when, frankly, like I actually looked back at this person's other tweets. I think they worked at CB Insights. And the irony is like the whole point of that business is to have like good data quality around private company data. And they just like literally had incorrect numbers by like a strong multiple on like what our revenue scale was, what our growth rate was, like, and if it gave me some consolation, I look back and like this person had also tweeted about other companies, like Flexport was the last like kind of takedown tweet. They had like, oh, Flexport's dead, and like, their valuation is too high and blah blah blah. And so I think that the more surprising thing was just like this person has been tweeting a bunch of like spicy takes that are not substantiated by real data or correct data. And yet, like this particular tweet went super viral, and that was the perplexing part to me. And then I think what really gave it legs was on the All In podcast, which is like obviously super popular. And I listened to it. Like, they covered it. They were like, oh, like latest on this week's news, like this tweet about Airtable. What do we think about this? And it almost I think became like a way to talk about a broader theme of what happens to this last generation of highly valued companies, maybe decacorn companies in this new, and at that point, it was like kind of the reset moment for both public and private markets. They did also issue a correction though. All In did a follow-up episode a few I think weeks later saying like, hey, like, we got the numbers wrong. Like, we're revising our case and kind of a view on Airtable.
What's that line about how a lie gets around the world some number of times before truth has time to get out of bed?
Yeah. Well, I think I learned about memes and virality very quickly in that experience. Not a very good social media person, but I think I learned a little more.
Yeah, it's tough. Twitter's the incentives are so misaligned. It's just I tweet something people want to share, not truth.
Well, I mean, especially like, I there's a lot to like. I would say net, I like the post-Elon Twitter more than the pre-Elon Twitter because it's just bolder. And like, I guess I really admire bold product execution where you're not just kind of stuck to like the current laurels. And they made so many changes, but like, I do feel like I get injected into my feed very sensational content all the time. And I mean, it works on me. I'm like, like I can't help but to like click on it and engage with it. And like, but it does, I think it does result in like this kind of content, like really spreading.
Yeah. Now Nikita running the show. I don't know if you saw this. We don't need to keep talking about Twitter, but there's a new feature where you take a screenshot of a tweet and it has like a huge x.com logo watermark in the top right. Yeah. Just to like, people are sharing these tweets all the time. Yeah. Oh man. Never a dull moment over there.
For sure.
Okay. I want to go in a completely different direction. Okay. Something that I'm really excited to talk to you about, which is this very emerging trend that I've noticed that I feel like you're at the forefront of CEOs becoming ICs again. It's kind of this move of IC CEOs getting their hands dirty again, building again, getting in the weeds, coding again. I feel like you're again at the forefront of this. Talk about just why you've done this, why you think this is important, and just what that looks like day to day to you versus what your life was like a few years ago.
The underlying reason for this shift, at least for me, is that as we started the company, I was very much in this mode, right? Like I was literally writing code, both on the back end, thinking about the real-time data architecture of our platform, also the front end, the UX. And I would argue that like in that founding moment, like the initial product market fit finding, and especially for a product that is like pure software, right? Like we weren't building like a operationally heavy business, like a dog walking marketplace where the tech is only an afterthought. Like the tech was the product, right? And in a very meta sense, like Airtable is the platform for other people to build their own apps, right? So like it's all about the tech. Like the very intimate design decisions, again, both architecturally and on the front end and the product UX choices, like that is the product's value prop, right? Like you can't separate those two. You can't say like, okay, like I researched the jobs to be done. Here's the workflow. Here's the process. And then like, okay, some engineer can just build it as an afterthought. Like it's those like little decisions and really be able to like be at the bleeding edge of what's possible, both in the browser and with like, kind of the real-time data architecture that made the product what it was, right? I think the same is true for Figma, which, actually like had a very parallel timeline to us. Like we both were founded around the same time, both spent 2.5 years building the product, like hands-on, that early team before launching. And, when I think now to like both the era in between that founding moment and then now, as well as like now the new kind of Gen AI moment, like I think there was a maturing era of both SaaS overall and Airtable specifically, where, as you scale up and you kind of learn how to build, teams and organizations, and like you have to kind of like scale up stuff that's not actually those intimate details, but process and people and so on, you kind of get, by default, further and further away from those details, right? And maybe for some businesses, that's fine because like no longer is it about finding like the details that make for a magical new product market fit. And it is really just about scaling up an existing thing that works, right? And using what I would call like more blunt instruments to kind of scale it up, right? Like a more blunt roadmap, a more blunt, kind of go-to-market execution strategy. Regardless, I think that now we're entering this moment where like certainly every software product, in my opinion, has to be refounded because like AI is such a paradigm shift. It's not even like just like the shift from desktop to mobile or on-prem to cloud, where that was more like a very one-time and somewhat predictable change in form factor. Like I think AI is so rapidly evolving that with every evolution, like every new model release and every new type of like capability that's released, it actually implies novel form factors and novel like UX patterns to be invented to fully capitalize on those capabilities. And so like to be continuously relevant and to kind of refine product market fit in this era, I think you have to be in the details. Like there is no like, looking at it from 10,000 foot view and saying, oh, we're just going to throw a bunch of people at this problem. It's actually understanding like what is the right product experience and the right business model that backs it up, and the right, everything else to support that engine to take advantage of the capabilities in our product domain.
You had this phrase somewhere where you talk about being the chief tastemaker.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to do exactly what you're describing.
That's right. I mean, I think that, and like I would also say like it's actually now also hard to taste the soup without participating in like at least some part of creating the soup, right? And like meeting with AI, you can kind of look at the final product and say, okay, like this feels right or not, or like it feels like we're being bold enough and we're properly, productizing these new capabilities. But I think like to really understand, the solution space of what's possible, you kind of have to be in the details, right? I mean, literally like you can't just look at, kind of screenshots or like a pre-recorded video of like a new product feature. Like AI is something you have to play with. And ideally you're playing with both the like kind of packaged up, app or solution that you've built with it, but you're also playing around directly with the underlying primitives. You're using the models either via API or via like a chat interface. Like you're really pushing them to the boundaries. And like, because that's the only way that you really understand what these new ingredients, it's like as a chef, you just gained access to like amazing new ingredients, but you have to like actually kind of get comfortable with them to put them into a new dish.
We had Dan Schipper on the podcast. He runs this newsletter and podcast. He put out a company called Every, and they work with companies to help them become more AI successful and adopt AI and all that stuff. And I asked him, what's the signal that a company will have success adopting AI and seeing huge productivity gains? And he said does the CEO use ChatGPT or Claude daily?
Yeah.
And I feel like you're describing exactly.
Right?
Hourly.
Literally hourly. Like, or, you could even like have a measure of like inference like cost, right? Like the equivalent underlying like inference compute cycles, right?
How many tokens they use?
So yeah, I mean, I'm proud to say like I'm pretty sure I'm still the I just checked this recently, but like I take pride in being the number one most expensive in inference cost user of Airtable AI. Not just within our own company, but I think for a long time I was globally across all our customers as well. Like, I mean, I'm extremely intentionally wasteful in the sense of like, I'll do something that costs like maybe hundreds of dollars of like actual inference cost, right? Like for instance, doing a lot of LLM calls against like long, kind of transcripts of, let's say, sales calls to extract different types of insights. Like here's the product apps identify, or here's summaries, et cetera. And we also have now a capability that's basically like an LLM map reduce. So effectively, even if you can't fit like, the entire corpus of content into one LLM call, because the context window limitations will map through like all of this content and break it up into chunks, and then like perform an LLM call on each one, and then perform an aggregation LLM call on those chunks. Very expensive, right? Because you're basically running like a highly expensive model against a lot of data and then running it again on the aggregates of that. But like for me, like hundreds of dollars spent on this exercise is trivial compared to the potential strategic value of like having better insights. It's as if like a really, really smart chief of staff has gone through and read every single sales call like transcript that we've had in the past year, and giving me like, kind of very astute product insights, marketing insights, like, kind of positioning insights and segmentation insights. Like that's invaluable, right? Like you could pay a consulting firm like literally millions of dollars to get that quality of work. So like to me, I still think the value versus the actual cost of AI when applied greedily but smartly, like it's a crazy ratio, and like more people should be like aggressively throwing compute cycles at these very high value problems.
Until somebody tweets how you're costing the company so much on AI compute, and you guys are going to be underwater. And just kidding.
It's like how we have personally taken down
That's right.
the cash flow profile of the business. Like,
So CEOs, founders hearing this, they're probably like, okay, I should probably start doing this. What does this actually look like? I imagine you still have a lot of other stuff. You got one-on-ones, you got all these, like, how have you changed your day-to-day to do this?
Yeah, so I actually cut my one-on-one roster by default, and the idea is not that I don't want to spend time one-on-one with people, but rather that I found that the just like having more standing one-on-ones actually precludes me from engaging in more timely topics, right? Like I like to think of the best types of meetings as like very urgency driven, and like there's some timely topic, like you've discovered some insight. Maybe I talked to some new startup, right? And I learned something from their product or their approach, and I want to bring that into how we're thinking about like a new feature at Airtable, or even just like plant the seed with like some different like EPD people within Airtable. Like I want to make most meetings very timely and very informed by like real alpha, right? There's got to be some kind of value and insight to seed that with. Now, in addition to that, I'll supplement with like, when I'm in person, with someone, like I want to carve out time for like a proper like catch up, and like less structured, less like timely, and just more of like, building a relationship with a human. But I actually find that like, having that it's almost a barbell approach where it's like, if you're going to spend time with somebody in a free form way, like actually do it in a high quality, not like forced weekly ritual way. Like go for a longer lunch or coffee walk or whatever in person when you can. Maybe that's like a once every month or two kind of thing. And then like the in-betweens are either topical. So we do have standing meetings for, like now we have a weekly basically sprint check-in on all of our AI execution stuff, which now is like half the company or half the EPD org is working on AI capabilities. We're trying to ship very quickly. Like, I basically want to always ask the question, like, how would an AI native company like a Cursor or Windsurf, et cetera, like, how would they execute, right? And are we executing as fast as them and taking advantage of like all the new stuff as well as them? So like bringing that level of like kind of intensity and urgency to like how I spend my time within, that's been the biggest shift for me.
What's a change you've made to help the company move faster and match that sort of pace?
Yeah, so I mean, we did do a reorg of the EPD org. So before we've gone through a few different kind of reorgs over the past, call it 4 years. The kind of original state, as we just kind of proliferated, I think by default or incrementally, was that we had a bunch of groups that were each responsible for like a feature or a surface area. So there was a group responsible for search within Airtable, and there was a group responsible for like mobile experience, and so on and so forth, right? And that has its benefits. Like, obviously like that team can go and like, get really ramped up on that part of the code base, that part of the product, but it has the disadvantage of, you tend to think incrementally when everyone's remit is actually like a feature that they incrementally improve by definition, as opposed to thinking about like a mission or like a outcome goal, right? That might need to, coordinate dramatic changes across a wider set of surface areas instead of just like each one kind of incrementally improving. And so we reorged initially to basically different business units effectively, right? So I know Airbnb has done like kind of the functional to GM, back, et cetera. This was more like saying, look, we have an enterprise business and the MO there is more about like scalability. Can we support like the larger scale data sets and use cases? Do you have the core capabilities needed to be able to like push out an app to maybe 10,000 seats or 20,000 seats for product operations, right? So a lot of architecture, a lot of scale, that kind of work. We would have a what we call the teams pillar, which is more about self-serve, like kind of the product UX, like how easy it is to adopt the product, onboard, share, do all the kind of like basic functionality. An AI pillar, solutions pillar, and then basically infra. And what we found though with that approach is that there was still, there was more kind of holistic bets being made. So like, the teams pillar could think not just about one feature, but like the overall onboarding experience. We're like really think about Nux, in a way that touched multiple parts of the product. But it still felt like it wasn't, especially as we started to execute more on AI stuff, like it wasn't, allowing us to aggressively and quickly move as a AI native company would, right? Like, I mean, when you look at, the Cursors of the world, they're shipping like major new stuff every week. And like, it's not like, oh, well, we have like this separate, kind of roadmap for enterprise. We have this roadmap for this group. And, it just feels like one cohesive product that's shipping at a breakneck pace. So we did this recent reorg where now we have what I call like the fast thinking group, which officially is called AI platform. But it really means like we want to just ship a bunch of new capabilities on a near weekly basis. And each of them should be like truly awesome value, right? Like you should drop your jaw at like how awesome it is to use this new capability in Airtable. And then separately, we have the slow thinking group. And that's not meant to be like better or worse. Like it's literally like you need fast and slow thinking in the Kahneman sense to operate, right? Like as a human.
I have that book behind me.
Yeah, I love that book. But slow thinking is like it's just a different mode of planning and executing, right? It's like more deliberate bets that require more premeditation, right? Like we can't just like ship a new piece of infrastructure that has a lot of like data complexity, like our data store HyperDB that now can handle like multi-hundred million record data sets. Like that's not something you ship in a week, right? In a hacky prototype. So we now have these two separate parts of the company, and I actually think what's really cool is like they actually complement each other very well, right? Because like the fast execution, the AI stuff, that creates the top of funnel excitement. That also, kind of inspires new use cases and new users to come into Airtable, including in large enterprise, right? Like, enterprises can use this stuff too. It's not just like a SMB thing, but like the slow thinking basically allows those initial seeds of adoption to sprout and grow into much larger deployments. Whereas I think a lot of the challenge for many of the AI native companies I've seen is that they can have like a very wide top of funnel, like get all of this AI tourist traffic, a lot of interest, a lot of like kind of like, early usage. But then, sometimes the challenge is how do you like turn that into more durable, growth and get each of those adoption seeds to retain and expand over time.
That is super cool. I've never heard of this way of structuring teams, the fast thinking fast, thinking slow, the Kahneman. It's so interesting. For the fast thinking team, do you find there's specific archetypes of people that are successful there? Is it a lot of like bringing in new people that are not just used to the way of working at Airtable? What do you find?
We we have a mix. So, we brought in, we're always hiring, right? Like there was never a point in the company's life where we stopped hiring. And that, candidly, even when we had to do 2 RIFs, right? That significantly, kind of reduced our headcount. We had just like way too quickly grown and overscaled the business at a certain point. But even when we did our RIFs, we were still actively recruiting and hiring, in every major department, but especially in EPD, because it's always been my belief that like you all like it would be arrogant to say that we have all the people we ever need already in the roster today, right? Like we're always going to need to find new, fresh perspectives, new skill sets, et cetera. And so we've continued to hire. I think we've learned as we've gone along of like, what is the ideal type of hire? And, we've done some acqui-hires and learned from that as well. But I think the fast thinking part, it really just requires a lot of like somebody who's able to operate with a lot of autonomy, right? Like, who's entrepreneurial in nature. Now, it doesn't mean like they have to literally be a former founder. I know some companies are, like Rippling, for instance, does a lot of actual acquisitions and gets actual founders into the company. Like we found that, that's great. And we've done some of that as well. But like also there are some really, really capable people who like we didn't literally have to like acquire in, and yet they're just able to like think full stack about the problem and like the user experience. Problem not just meaning like, the technical layers of the problem, but like also like what is the wow factor we're trying to create, right? So tangibly, like, we're doing this new thing that's about to ship where, not only can you describe the app you want to build and then iterate on it with, kind of our conversational agent Omni, but and it builds it with like the existing Airtable platform capabilities, but we're also giving it the ability to actually do code gen to extend those apps with like really final mile, very bespoke functionality or like visuals, right? So you could say like, hey, generate me a very, very specific type of map view with like this kind of like heat mapping and this kind of like, icons. And when you click it, do this. And like, that's a capability that like, there's so much ambiguity in some of the design decisions around it. Like, and you have to blend that design thinking with some of the technical constraints of like, what can the AI models actually one shot effectively? And if not, like, how do you add in like the right human workflow for approval and review and then reprompting and so on? So just so many different like design decisions. And you need somebody who can like really think full stack about that kind of product and is not overwhelmed by that, kind of open-endedness, but like relishes in it.
I was actually playing with it before we started chatting. I made a really cute startup CRM.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, started talking Omni over here. It's like the colors are beautiful. That's what's standing out to me right now.
I mean, it is.
Yeah.
I will say, like, just as a note, I consider myself like at my core, like a product UX person, right? Like that's my like passion, and everything else I've had to learn to kind of run this company is almost like what was a necessary, part of the journey. Like, but like my real passion is thinking about product UX, right? And I think of UX in a deeper sense than just like the cosmetic, like design, like, what you could put into a framer, kind of prototype. Like I think of it as like literally like, what should this product do and how should it represent that and behave for the user? That is the product, in my opinion, right? And of course, then you have to figure out like technically what's possible and how to implement it. But like, I think to me, what's under executed today in the world of AI products is like, there's so many awesome capabilities of AI, and most of them are really under merchandised. And there's like very poor, actually, visual or otherwise metaphors or affordances given to users to help represent or understand like what those underlying capabilities are, right? Like, I mean, ChatGPT, obviously, like, extremely successful product, so not knocking it at all. But like, you come in and you just get this like completely blank chat box, right, by default. And now they have suggestions underneath it and so on. But like, the product UX part of me is just like craving more visual metaphors or colors or some kind of like use the canvas of a web interface to and all the richness of interaction you create there to better represent or show all the different things that you can do with with the underlying model, right? And so that's something we've tried to do with Airtable, is like show like all of the different states and like use colors even to play those up.
It's interesting how much of this connects with, I just had Nick Turley on the podcast. He's head of ChatGPT at OpenAI. And he had these two really interesting insights that resonate directly with what you're describing. One is he has this concept of whenever something is being worked on, he's always asking, is this maximally accelerated? How do we move faster? If this is important, what would allow us to move faster?
Yeah.
And I love that that's one of the themes that's coming up as you talk, is just this creating this very clear sense of speed. And you even call it the fast thinking team, like you're going to move fast.
Yeah.
And then the other one is just this insight that with AI, you often don't know what it can do and what people want to do with it until it's out. So there's this need to get it out, and that'll tell you what it should be.
I couldn't agree more with both of those, and particularly on the second point. I think it's interesting. Like, clearly, there have been companies that have both been successful in PLG and like kind of more sales led, kind of distribution for AI products. Like, the most notable ones I can think of are like Palantir with their AIP deployments. Like that's obviously very sales led. You're not PLGing into a Palantir deployment, but even like companies like Harvey and so on, like they're doing very well, and like it's primarily, from what I understand, like sales led, right? You're not self-serving into a Harvey instance at a law firm, and yet, like to me, the best way to get AI value out there is experientially, right? And so like you can kind of get that in a sales motion. You can like, show a demo, maybe you can do a POC, but like it's so much more powerful when you just open up the doors and say anyone who wants to come and sign up and trial this product, like can, right? And I think, it's, to me, it's like, kind of a real proof point that like ChatGPT is arguably like the most successful, kind of PLG product of all time, right? Just in terms of like sheer scale of users. Like they announced 700 million like is it MAUs or I think it's
weekly active users. 10% of humans on Earth use it weekly.
Insane. That's insane. In like how many years, right? Like a few years.
3 years, under 3 years.
Yeah, and so like I mean, literally that is just like the most insane ramp curve. And I don't think they would have gotten there if like you couldn't just come in and literally try the product out. Like and kind of as a little bit of a rebuttal of the point I made earlier, where like I think ChatGPT doesn't do a ton right now, and even earlier, like they did even less to like expose all the different ways you could use it. But they just made it so frictionless to just try it for yourself that you as a user could come in and just literally ask it anything and see how it did. And of course, like people in the early days tried to stump it and showed like, oh look, see, it's not that smart. Like it doesn't answer this hard question really well. But like clearly the magical like kind of nature of it still appealed to you enough. You everybody used it. And so I think I do have a view, like we've gone through that whole kind of arc of, we started PLG. I'd like to think Airtable was one of the kind of PLG darlings of our era. And I kind of started moving up market and like doing more sales execution, although that was still always on top of like usually PLG within an enterprise. But we started doing more and more sales execution. We still have that. That's still really important for our business. But I also think like me personally, like one of my goals is to shift my attention back into that kind of like, builder-led adoption and like literally showing in the product experientially, not telling in like a deck, the value that you can get from AI and Airtable, right? Like I think that's so key. And it's Nux, but it's also more than that. It's not just like literally how do you onboard somebody into the product. It's like literally thinking about the entire product experience itself, right? And in our case, like we just like made the entire product experience AI centric, right? Like it used to be that like, we had kind of this like secondary thing that you could ask questions to, the assistant sidebar. We now made our agent the default way of doing everything in Airtable. And like, it's like now the Airtable app as you know it is almost like an artifact that's manipulated by, and kind of like can be tool used by the agent.
Let me follow that thread. So if you go to airtable.com today, it looks like basically all the other AI app building sites. Now it's just tell me which you want to build. Thoughts on that as just like a thing everyone's starting to do? What do you think comes next? Is it working well?
There's clearly an incredible magic to vibe coding and app building with AI, right? And this is actually, like a prime illustration, in my view, of that concept we talked about a second ago, which is, as capabilities of these underlying models evolve, the form factor and the product UX also needs to evolve with it, right? And so, like the earliest models, like the kind of original ChatGPT, like GPT 3.5, kind of era models, were not nearly as smart as the current models, right? And so, like you couldn't really ask it to one shot a more complicated chunk of code or certainly not like a full stack app and expect it to work. And so the right form factor for leveraging those models in a software creation context was GitHub Copilot, right? It's like autocomplete a few lines of code at a time, right? But you couldn't chat to it and tell it like, build me this entire app from scratch, right? And I think that like, as the models got better and better, you saw that the new form factors emerge. Like I think Cursor did a great job of like being an early pioneer of this more agentic way of leveraging the models to do more complex things and generate more, kind of larger chunks of code. And now with Composer, you can literally just go into Cursor and build an app from scratch, like build me a 3D shooter game from scratch and just watch it go and like create all the files and, fill out each file. And then like, like the thing actually runs some of the time. And so to me, this is, where the world is going. The models are clearly getting smarter. And, if you think about the original vision of Airtable, it was always about democratizing software creation. Like, we just strongly believed that, the number of people who use apps far outweighs the number of people who can actually like build their own or manipulate apps and like harness like custom software to their advantage.
That sounds very familiar these days.
Yeah, exactly. And so like, I think this is like, it's a different means to the same end. And so like, it's almost like we have to lean into this, because if we started Airtable today, like this is what we would be all in on. Now, I think that the advantage that we have, and like, I do think you have to be realistic to yourself, especially as a company that predates Gen AI and now has to kind of find your new footing in the AI landscape. Like, you can't fool yourself and just say like, okay, I'm going to throw in some AI stuff on the marketing site, put in a couple AI features and call it a day. Like, I think you actually have to take a clean slate approach to saying like, how would our mission best be expressed? Like, if you were literally founding a new company from scratch with the same mission, how would you execute on that mission using a fully AI native approach, right? And like, and then by the way, like, do you have useful building blocks, that you can leverage from your existing product and your existing business, or are you literally worse off having this legacy asset versus starting something from scratch? And like, I don't think the answer is always yes or no. I think it just depends on the product. And if you can't really introspect and say like, look, I think I'm better off doing this with the pieces that I have from my existing business and product, then I think you should sell, right? Like, you should find a buyer for that company and then go and like, if you really care about this mission, like go and start the next carnation of it, right? In my case, like I really, thought about this and like really feel strongly that the building blocks that we have, like these no code components, actually do allow us to execute better on this vision than if I had to start from scratch, right? Meaning, like, the problem with vibe coding, especially for building business apps. So I should clarify that, like, we want to democratize software creation, but specifically we are focused on business apps, right? We're not trying to be the platform where you create like a cool viral consumer game. This is for like your CRM, right? Or if you want to build an inventory management system as a small restaurant, or a lawyer trying to build like a case management system, like that's what we've always been focused on. And I think in this AI native world, clearly you should be able to generate those apps agentically. And yet, if you have an agent that has to generate every single bit of that app from scratch, from code, it's going to be very unreliable. There's going to be bugs. There's going to be data and security issues. And then you're also going to have a context collapse, as it just cannot manage all of the code that it's written, basically, as the app gets more and more complex, right? And what we actually have are basically these primitives that the agent can manipulate and use without having to like literally write the code from scratch to represent like, here's a beautiful CRUD interface on top of the data layer, right? Like, ours is real-time and collaborative and really rich and has collaboration on it. And by the way, here's all these other view types and a layout engine for a custom interface, a layout, right? Or automations and business logic. And so it's almost like, in programming terms, like the Airtable pieces in our Lego kit today can be used by this agent as almost like a more expressive DSL, like a domain-specific language, to build business apps, instead of literally having to write everything down to like the SQL and HTML and JavaScript to build every part of that app from scratch. And so, like, if we can combine the best of both worlds, like we have these very reliable, high-quality Lego pieces, now an agent can go and like assemble them for you instead of you just using the GUI to do that. And by the way, if you do want to fall back to the GUI, there's a really great, kind of way for the non-technical user to still understand and participate in what's going on. Whereas if you're not technical, you can't inspect the code underneath a V0 or Lovable or Replit app, right? Like, it's just kind of opaque to you. And if you can't reprompt it to get what you want, you're kind of stuck. This is much more akin to like a developer using Cursor can generate lots of code, but then can still drop back to the IDE to edit and manipulate it to the final, kind of production ready state. So like, that's kind of the play that we're making. And if I didn't fully and truly believe like, we have a better shot at doing it with our existing product, like I wouldn't be running this company in its form today.
I'm talking to a lot of founders that are going through the journey you're going on, which is, we've had a business for a decade, AI emerged, and wow, we got to figure out something that could work even better. And so I'm trying to pull out the threads that are consistently working across these journeys because I think a lot of companies are trying to figure this out. So one that you just touched on is just if you were to start today, what would you do? Like,
Yeah.
what would that business be?
Yeah.
Plus, how can do we have an unfair advantage with the thing we've done in the past?
Yeah.
That feels like an important ingredient. And then the other, circling back to stuff you've shared already, there's just like creating a sense of urgency and pace and getting people to understand this is how things move in AI. And we need to create this fast thinking team. I love that metaphor and framing. And then there's the point you made about just talking to AI regularly as the founder feels like an important element, just like to truly be this ICCO talking to AI, working with AI regularly. Just on that note, a little bit more, just to give people a sense of what this looks like day to day. So you're talking to Omni all day, trying to flex the power of what you can do and iterate on it. Is there anything else you're doing day to day that helps you figure out what to do for the business?
One, I try to use as many different AI products, including not Airtable, right? Like as I can. And both literally for the novelty factor and just like, some new cool demo comes out, like Runway released their like immersive world, kind of engine, right? And so like I'm gonna go try that out, right? Like when Sesame AI put out their like cool, like kind of interactive voice chat demo, like I tried that out because like even though we don't have a direct and near term like need for like really realistic and interruptible like kind of voice mode, where it's not as core to our capabilities, like I just want to understand and like get a feel for everything that's out there, right? And I try to invent little like kind of almost like side projects of my own to have a real kind of reason to use these products. Like, oh cool, what if I were to take like what if I were to like try to create like a funny little like a funny video short, right? Using a combination of like HeyGen avatars with like a script, like a comical script generated by AI, right? And maybe it'll be on like an interesting topic. So I'll do like deep research on the topic with ChatGPT and pull together the results, have it compose like, kind of a
Did you actually do this? Is there something
yeah,
you
I
made
mean, like
this?
that's literally an example of something like just a fun weekend project. And like to be honest, like these things only take you like an hour, right? If you become kind of pretty proficient with using the products, like they're all so easy to use. Like you can literally do the deep research thing, kick off query, make a coffee, come back in 20 minutes. Okay, like let me prompt it to like generate me some dialogue. It's a little bit like what Notebook LM does for you out of the box, but sometimes I like to just like do it myself, right? And then okay, let me take the script and like cut it up and like turn it into a HeyGen avatar and then download the video and like play it, right? Like, and just for fun, right? I'm not like trying to make that into an actual like, kind of YouTube like video business. But I think like coming up with like these different like fun weekend projects is a really useful construct to like force myself to actually try these products in a more than just like a Twitch click way. And what it gives me is like it's not just understanding the models, which is also very, very important, right? Like GPT-5 came out yesterday, been like playing around with it a bunch, just on like a variety of different like personal use cases. But like there's a difference between just understanding the model, but then also understanding like the product form factors in which they can be placed, right? Meaning like, when you apply the model in a more structured way, right? When you apply the model with different tool calling than maybe what ChatGPT has in its kind of like out of the box form, when you apply it with like, kind of a more agentic workflow, again, that might be different from like what ChatGPT gives you out of the box. Like that's when you kind of learn, like, you really get to inspire yourself on like what are the product form factors that these new models can take. So like, and plus, by the way, like I find it to be really fun. Like there is to me, like a delight and entertainment value to just using AI period, because like it's not like perfectly predictable. So I think the element of like you're not quite sure what you're gonna get, it's like a box of chocolates, and B, like it always blows my mind just to think about like, wow, like 5 years ago we didn't have any of this stuff, right? Like AI was like, okay, like it's like we can do predictive analytics. It's like there's some like basically very advanced kind of regressions that we can run with AI, but like it looked nothing like this, right? In its current form. And it's just like actually super fun, in my opinion, to get to play around with all the different types of products that come out. So I think that is a big part of it. Because on the point about like the pace of the world moving so much faster in AI than any other landscape, it's like, in SaaS, in the mature SaaS era, like it was important to study your competition, right? Like if you were building a SaaS company, you'd be crazy not to follow Salesforce, right? Every like year and see what the major releases they're putting out are, or ServiceNow, or, so on. Like this is the equivalent of that, but like there's major new releases and products and so on, like every week, right? Not like every year. And so I just think you have to stay abreast of it all. And combining this with our point earlier of like a lot of this has to be experienced, not just like read. Like you can't just read like the write-up on TechCrunch or even a tweet about like a new capability. Like you kind of have to try it to really get a sense of like what it is.
Today's episode is brought to you by Anthropic, the team behind Claude. I use Claude at least 10 times a day. I use it for researching my podcast guests, for brainstorming title ideas for both my podcast and my newsletter, for getting feedback on my writing, and all kinds of stuff. Just last week, I was preparing for an interview with a very fancy guest, and I had Claude tell me what are all the questions that other podcast hosts have asked this guest so that I don't ask them these questions. How much time do you spend every week trying to synthesize all of your user research insights, support tickets, sales calls, experiment results, and competitive intel? Claude can handle incredibly complex, multi-step work. You can throw a 100-page strategy document at it and ask it for insights, or you can dump all your user research and ask it to find patterns. With Claude 4 and the new integrations, including Claude 4 Opus, the world's best coding model, you get voice conversations, advanced research capabilities, direct Google Workspace integration, and now MCP connections to your custom tools and data sources. Claude just becomes part of your workflow. If you want to try it out, get started at claude.ai/Lenny, and using this link, you get an incredible 50% off your first 3 months of the Pro plan. That's claude.ai/Lenny. For people that work for you across Airtable, say the product team, PMs, maybe engineers, designers, how have you adjusted what you expect of them to help them be successful in this new world?
One is, really, really, really stressing this idea of like, go play with this stuff. And I mean, when I say play, I really mean play like in the psychological sense of like, there's a difference when like you go in and you're kind of just trying to check the box and like get a job done, right? There's a difference when like you come in with a curiosity and like, you're kind of like exploring, right? And it's both more fun and energizing, but also I think like you learn more through that, right? And so like I've really tried to stress the value of play with these AI products. And I kind of, try to lead by example by like literally going and like sharing out links or screenshots like, of the things that I'm doing in these various products. So like, as an example, like I will go into, like one of the prototyping tools and show like, hey, like, I built a marketing landing page for, this new capability we're launching. I kind of created like a landing page for it in Replit, let's say, and now I'm sharing that link instead of, what typically like we would have done in the past is like, okay, we're going to write a doc about it and then share the doc. I'm just going to share you like an actual landing page with like visuals and everything in there, right? Or like I'll share like, the actual link to my deep research reports, or like instead of me writing a perfect memo on a topic, like I'll actually just like prompt my way into getting like a chat thread or a chat output that basically covers all the content that I care about, and maybe even like ask it to like, okay, summarize this all into like a final, kind of like memo output, and then intentionally share that rather than expose the fact that like I'm using AI in this way and here's literally how I'm prompting it so you can follow along as well. But really trying to encourage everyone to like go and just play with these products. And I've even said, look, if anyone wants to just literally block out a day or frankly even a week and have the ultimate excuse, like you can use like, you could say that I told you to do it, right? Like if you want to cancel all your meetings for like a day or for an entire week and just go play around with every AI product that you can find that you think could be relevant to Airtable, go do it, like period. So I think that's the most important thing is like this play, this experimentation. I think there's also a lot of other, kind of shifts in how we execute prototypes over decks. Like I want to see like actual interactive demos because like, again, like it's hard to in a deck or in a PRD, you could say like, okay, well, we're going to make Omni really good at handling this kind of app building. Okay, those are just words. The real proof is in the pudding of like, okay, let me try it out on a few like realistic prompts that I can imagine. And in a demo, in a real prototype, you can like instantly, try it out on realistic rather than golden pathy scenarios, and see how it feels too. Like, does it feel too slow? Like, do we need to expose more of the reasoning or steps, that are happening behind the scenes, create a progress bar or something like that. But like, it's really hard to get that feel of the product with anything but like a functional prototype that really does in an open-ended way, like use the AI to do whatever, you put in. So, I think it's more like a, like experimentation playground, it feels like, how we need to execute versus, I think in the past, it sometimes felt like a more like deterministic resourcing and like kind of timelines view of execution, right? Like we're going to put this many people on this problem, and this is the 8-week timeline to this milestone, and then we're going to ship in a quarter from now. And like, I think now the whole thing is just like a lot more experimentation and iteration driven.
Of the different functions on a product team, PM, engineering, design, who has had the most success being more productive with these tools? And how do you think this will impact each of these three functions over time?
What I found is that it really does become more about individual attitude and maybe some like, polymathism. Like, there's a strong advantage to any of those three roles who can kind of cross over into the other two, right? Like kind of the hybrid unicorn types, right? So if you're a designer who can be just technical enough to kind of be dangerous and understand a little bit of like how these models work and, like how does tool calling work and all of this stuff, like then you can actually design a concept or even prototype a concept, including in these prototyping tools, that's much more interesting and maybe realistic than if you're just stuck in kind of the flat, like, let me put something in a static design, right? Concept, right? Because I think, designs have to be more interactive. Like the whole, the value of the product and the product functionality is in the interaction of it, right? Like, think about the design of ChatGPT. Again, it's like, it's the most basic design you could possibly imagine. The real design actually is happening underneath the hood in how it responds to different queries, right? And what happens after you fire off a prompt, right? So, I think like I found that there are people within each of these functions, like there are engineers who are very good at thinking about product and experience and like, kind of can go and prototype out like the whole thing. There are designers who can kind of do the same, even if they can't literally code, they can prototype something out like literally using a prototyping tool. And I think that's where like AI tooling is also giving more advantage to people who can think in this way by equipping them with an alternative to actually having to go through the long hoops of learning CS, right? And then PMs as well. I think like there are some PMs who are like really getting into the technical details and studying up on like, how does this stuff work and actually getting hands-on rather than seeing their role as, kind of writing documents, writing PRDs.
Do you see one of these roles, I don't know, being more in trouble than others? Just like you need fewer of these people in the future potentially?
I think overall you can get more done with fewer people. And that's not to say like, we want to go and like make the team smaller, but rather like the really cool thing for us and I think a lot of other companies is it's not like you have a finite set of things you need to do and execute on from a product standpoint. And okay, like now I can do that with a tenth of the people. I mean, you could do that in a lot of cases, but like for us, maybe it's also because we're a very meta product, right? Like we are the app platform with which you can build now any AI app with AI, right? The apps themselves leverage AI capabilities at runtime, whether it's to generate imagery for a creative production workflow or, kind of leveraging deep research or AI-based like, kind of crawling of the web to search for companies that match a certain criteria for your deal flow app, right? Or something like that. Like we can effectively leverage all of these different AI capabilities in this kind of like app platform because by definition, we're enabling our customers to build apps that have this wide range of AI capabilities. But because of that, it's like we have a, kind of almost infinite like set of possible AI capabilities that we could execute on, right? And I'm always telling the team, like, look, like the great news is like we have all these fruit trees, and like there's so many crazy low-hanging fruit, right? Like, and you got literally like massive watermelons, like literally sitting on the ground, right? And all you have to do is like kind of walk over 20 feet and pick it up instead of having to climb the really tall coconut tree to grab like a hard coconut from like 50 feet up. And so like there's so many watermelons on the ground, just go out and like start finding the biggest ones and attacking those, right? And like, and what that means is that like, if we can build this culture, and I do think like it's a learnable way of operating, like I really like to believe in like the growth potential of like any human, right? Like, and any individual. Like, I think if you really have a growth mindset, and that's why one of our like most important core values is growth mindset, right? Like, if you really have that growth mindset, I think like, especially if you're willing to put in the nights and weekends hours, or in my case, like I'm literally telling people like, take a full day off, take a full week off and learn this stuff. Like, you can, become more fluent in this way. And I think then what we get is like a team that can just go and work on more things in a much more leveraged and fast way, right? So I like to think like, people who are willing to jump on the train are just going to become more and more effective. And it's not like, oh, like as a PM, my role is becoming entirely irrelevant, right? Like, no, it means that as a PM, you need to start looking more like a hybrid PM prototyper who has some good design sensibilities. And by the way, like, I think some of the best Eng PM and design cultures, respectively, over the past even few decades, have always been multidisciplinary in nature, right? Like the original PM spec at Google required the PMs to actually be somewhat technical, so they could understand the engineering, kind of limitations of like the product, designs they wanted to make, and they had to be kind of designy, right? Like I remember my co-founder Andrew, when he was in the APM program, was like always reading books about like design, like even down to like visual design and color theory and that kind of thing, right? And so I think it's just a reminder that, like designers as well, like some of the best designers, if you're a designer at Apple, like, including hardware designer, like you have to understand some of the technical capabilities of how this stuff works, right? And if you're an engineer, like I think some of the best engineers, and maybe Stripe always had a very good engineering culture of engineers who could think about the product and business requirements. And in fact, like, on any given product group at Stripe, my understanding is that like, the DRI isn't always the PM, right? Like as is traditionally the case in kind of that triangle. It's like, sometimes it's actually the engineer who's taking the product lead and saying like, this is what we need to build.
So what I'm hearing is essentially, if you want, like the trend across product engineering and design is each of those functions needs to get good at one of the other functions at least.
Yeah.
Ideally, you can do them all, but if you can just do one additional, so PM becomes better at design and engineer becomes better at product management.
I would actually go further and say, like, I think you need to get like decently good at all three. Like, there's just a minimum baseline of like, if you're any one of those roles, you need to be like minimally good at the other two. And then you can go deeper into your own kind of specialty, right? Like, you could be a designer who's really good at thinking about UX and interaction design, and then just like good enough to be dangerous on thinking about like what's technically possible and like what is the product, kind of story around this feature.
I love that. And to do that, one piece of advice that comes up again and again in what you've been describing is use the tools constantly to see what's possible, and that will teach you a lot of these things.
I think use the tools gives you exposure to what's possible, right? It's kind of like if you wanted to be a great industrial designer, and let's say like, I mean, the chair is kind of the ultimate like hello world of like industrial design, right? It's like the like canonical design object. Like, you wouldn't just sit there in a vacuum and with no familiarity with like the materials that you can use, plywood, steel, whatever, or like existing form factors of chairs, trying to invent the world's best chair in a vacuum, right? Like, you should go and first do a study of like all of the best chairs out there today. Like, go look at an Eames chair, sit in it, and like try to examine it to kind of reverse engineer how it was made, right? And like, and just look at the prior art for that type of product. Like, that's how I see the go out and play with these products. And also, I think like actually going and designing or implementing or executing is the best practice. So like, you can't just only go and look at other people's shares, like eventually you have to go and like actually try building your own and then try building another one and another one and another one. And so I think that's where like, when I think about how I honed my own product UX sensibilities, like I never like, and at that time, like that I was in school and kind of learning about this stuff, like there wasn't really any good curriculum for UX, right? It's not like there were like great, college classes to learn product UX. I mean, even CS was like very academic in nature at that time. It wasn't applied software engineering, like build an app or whatever. Maybe now at like some of the schools like Stanford, MIT, they have like actually UX-y type courses, but it's still a rarity for most people to have access to that. And so like the way I learned like all of my product sensibilities was just like trial and error and like also using and studying other products, right? And then going and trying to build like my own weekend project ideas, right? Oh, I want to build like a Yelp style app with a map view and then also a list view. And I want it so that when you pan around in the map, for it to automatically update the list view. And maybe there's some UX improvements I can make on top of that, but I can also like test my technical skills to figure out like which parts of this are hard to implement and like how do you make it work and what are some of the design changes or affordances that you can use to kind of like map to like the technical possibilities.
To do that, I loved your piece of advice, which I forgot to double down on, which I also find really powerful. The best tip there is find something to actually build that is useful to you and fun. Like pick a project that's like, oh yeah, this would be fun to do. Have like a problem you're solving that forces you to actually do this thing.
For sure. And look, I think that can be like night and weekend projects. It can also be like the daytime job projects, right? I mean, like I am basically telling our teams on the AI platform group, especially like, look, like, in that low-hanging fruit metaphor, it's like, I'm not being prescriptive with you on like which watermelons you should pick. But like you should go and like, and we do have different like pods within that group. But one of them, for instance, is what we call the field agents team. And they are responsible for the agents that work within your app. So this is not the agent that builds your app, but these agents that run on a customer's behalf to do like web research on your customers, or they can, go and analyze a document. And like in the future, maybe do things like actually generate a like prototype like of a feature, from a PRD or from like a feature idea. And I'm telling them like, look, like there's a almost infinite number of things you could like superpowers you can give these field agents. I'm not going to tell you which specifically to do. Now you can ask me to weigh in for sure, but like you should go and like, just experiment and prototype like a few different versions of like a few different directions we could go. Like what if you prototyped what it would look like to have a deep research implementation in field agents, so that like for any given row of data, let's say in your case, it's podcast guests, you can just click a button or click a button en masse across the entire, like every speaker you have lined up to do deep research, like powered by ChatGPT's own deep research on each of the speakers, and have them all laid out side by side in this table, right? Like go prototype that and see how see how it feels and looks like. And so I think some of the stuff can also be like in your daytime job, especially if that daytime job is literally to go and build AI functionality.
I actually tried to do exactly that. The problem I ran into, I wonder if it's changed, is there's no API for ChatGPT deep research yet.
There is now.
There is. There we go.
It ends up being, and I think they only recently exposed it. It ends up being like something on the order of like $1 plus per research call, which
what a deal.
Like, I mean, again, exactly. I mean, some people would say, oh my God, that's so expensive. And you rack up 50 of those, you've cost $50 a month. I think it's like, well, it just saved you like hours of research by a human. Like,
not only that, I actually have a researcher that I pay to give me background on guests. That was like $400 or $500, and the dollar sounds great. And I've been doing this. I've been doing this manually.
He's smart. He would be using deep research and then just collecting the R1.
They might just be. Oh man. Okay, there's one more skill I wanted to talk about real quick. This comes up a lot in these conversations, is evals.
Okay.
The power of getting good at evals. I know that's something you value highly. Talk about just why you think this is something people need to get good at.
Yeah, I mean, and I listened to your episodes with Bill and Mike who talk about this. I think it's like interesting that like like both heads of OpenAI and Anthropic have converged on this point. I mean, look, I think I would add like a slightly different or additive take though, which is like I think for a completely novel product experience or form factor, you should actually not start with evals, and you should start with vibes, right? Meaning like, you need to go and just kind of test in a much more open-ended way. Like, does this even work? Like, in kind of like a broad sense. So like, as an example, for our custom code generation capability, like instead of defining evals that get repeatedly tested, as you vary like the prompt or the model or like the agentic workflow used to generate these outputs, and you have to define like, what does good look like, right? By definition for the eval, like I would first start with a much more open-ended and like ad hoc style of like just throw stuff against the wall, like try different prompts and see how well it does. And to me, evals are more useful, once you've converged on the kind of like basic scaffold of the form factor and you kind of know what are the use cases you want it to work well for and what you want to test against it. Whereas in the early days, especially if your product market fit finding either for an entirely new company or for like a pretty dramatically new or bold new capability that doesn't really have like, it's not an incremental improvement of something that exists in Airtable today. Like, I think you have to just be a little bit more creative initially and like throwing stuff at it, seeing what works to understand, okay, like, let's use an example. We're implementing this new capability that can use basically a long running AI crawler agent that goes and researches the web, for a specific type of object or entity, right? So it's a little bit different from deep research. It's similar to deep research, but what it actually does is instead of outputting like a, kind of a report, it's actually going and compiling a list of things. The things could be companies or people, or anything else, right? Like find me every Marvel movie, right, ever made. Find me every like, kind of DC comics, like spinoff, right? Like series, right? Literally anything. And, you have to go in and first like just try out a bunch of random, like, use your own brain to think of like, what are all the like, what's the range of use cases I can test this against, right? And then you get back some results and you're like, okay, well, like it's clear that like where it does really well are these types of searches, right? Like people and companies with this kind of parameter. And I think to me, like evals are useful once you have like a sense of like, what is that cluster of useful use cases. You can start then more programmatically, like measuring the changes that you're making to improve like the output for that, right? But like by that point, you've probably already scoped the product, and maybe the way we would merchandise it in in Airtable is not like a completely open-ended capability, but like, hey, like here is a specific capability that can research one of these X number of entity types, including people and companies. And here's even like the filter conditions or criteria that are more explicit that you can define to give it the prompting to search for that thing, right? But I kind of think it's more useful as a way to iterate your way to improvement. And you can start, really testing stuff like empirically, right? You can A/B test, especially if you have the scale of a really large product like Anthropic or OpenAI. You can like just test everything and see like, oh, this model actually performs better than this one. This prompt performs better than this one. But I think early on, like you don't have that luxury and you're in a much more open-ended discovery process.
That is very wise. Evals can constrain you too early. I think about just the double diamond, I don't know, IDEO kind of framework of like be divergent first and then converge, and then maybe that's where you want to start.
Exactly. I hadn't heard that before, but that completely resonates.
Okay. Let me try to reflect back some of the advice I've been hearing about how to shift a company to be successful in this new world. And let me see if I'm missing anything that you think is really important. So one is there's this sense of just like reset the expectations on pace and urgency and help people understand in AI, things move incredibly fast. This is how we need to operate. And then there's also a piece of get stuff out so that you can learn how people use it and what it's capable of versus polishing it endlessly. Forcing people almost, I don't know, forcing is the right word, but encouraging people to play with the latest stuff and like giving them chance to take days off or block out calendars, cancel meetings, just like stay on top of this stuff. To play as you talked about it, and then sharing things they've learned, get the vibes of what's possible. There's also this idea of just rethink, okay, if we were to start today in this world, what would we do to achieve the same mission we are trying to achieve? And ideally, it leverages this unfair advantage we have with things we've been working on for a long time. And then there's just like talk to AI constantly every hour, as you described.
Yeah, multiple times an hour if possible.
Multiple times an hour. It
Yeah.
keeps going up. Is there anything else that I missed there that you're like, you need to do this too to have a chance?
I think just to really, really try to break down role silos. Like, and I think that's true certainly for EP&D in the typical like EPD triangle. But I also think it's probably true even for like non-product roles, right? Like I think it's true in marketing, right? Like I'm seeing something something I'm really pushing for in marketing. I think our marketing team is like really leaning into actually is like if you can just do all of the thing yourself, like traditionally, how a marketing team might operate is like, okay, you have one person who's kind of responsible for executing the performance marketing, kind of part of a campaign, right? Like they literally go into the Google AdWords interface and they're like tweaking the parameters of targeting and, budget and like, kind of conversion, tracking, et cetera. And then somebody else is actually responsible for like coming up with the specific ad copy, right? And somebody else yet was responsible for coming up with like the seed content or positioning, guide, like written by a PMM that feeds into the ad creative and, so on and so forth, right? Like maybe they're promoting some like new demo asset, right? That somebody else yet created. And I just think that like, in the same way that you can collapse the roles in EPD and like the ideal person, maybe they're very specialized and deep in one dimension, like engineering, but they're well-rounded enough to kind of like be dangerous on the other two. Like, I think that's kind of true in almost every other function, right? Like, like sales as well. Like, I think you should, start to be able to play more of an SE role. Like traditionally salespeople didn't necessarily know the product that well and like, kind of relied on the SE to come in and be the product experts. Like, I think it's really hard to sell any kind of AI product now without actually being fluent in the product and be able to demo the product, right? So like, AEs need to be like SE fluent as well. So I just think that concept of like collapsing roles, everybody needs to like become more full stack to do the thing, like being more outcome oriented, right? Like your outcome as an AE is to like show customers, convince customers of the value of your product and close deals, right? Okay, well, in order to do that, like you used to have dependencies on having assets created by marketing and like, an SE to help you demo. Like, can you collapse more of those dependencies so that if you had to, you could do it all yourself, right? And I just think that's a new way, like it's a new operating mentality overall for every AI native company or company that wants to compete in this new arena.
That is a great addition. It almost feels like you go back to startup times when everyone's doing a bunch of stuff. There's no like, here's the head of product, here's the head of engineering. We're just doing stuff. It needs to be done.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing it as this is like upside down T, where there's like the thing you're really strong at, and then you just have to, as you described, the minimum of being good at engineering design or an SE, by the way, sales engineering, imagine is what that stands for. That you just like they're adjacent roles. You need to start having a baseline. The baseline is increasing of how much you need to understand that. Everyone's Venn diagrams are kind of converging.
Exactly.
Amazing. Okay, let me take a step back and kind of zoom out and think about the broader journey you've been on over the past decade plus. Let me just ask you this. What's the most counterintuitive lesson you've learned about building Airtable, building a company, building teams that maybe goes against common startup wisdom?
I heard your interview with Brian Chesky, and then later you talked about founder mode in that kind of YC retreat. And the points there really, really resonated with me. And I feel like maybe less eloquently, I kind of like deduced, some of the same principles just in my own experience, which is like, I think when you're scaling up, and this relates also to what we talked about before around like the early days of building a company, you're like in the details, you're finding product market fit. You kind of have to be like, pretty versatile, right? Like, all these decisions from a technical standpoint to design to even commercial and like, what's the freemium model going to be like? And like, how are we going to market this product? What does the website look like? Like, they're all very intertwined, right? You can't like compartmentalize and then like, almost like factory produce, kind of each of these things separately. Like they're all intertwined, right? And you have a very small, tight-knit team that's like a tight-knit team that's thinking full stack about all of this combined. And, obviously like that's the only way, in my opinion, to create like that magical product market fit in the first place. And then I think as you scale up, the default guidance that you often get from, like operational experts and kind of like larger scale, kind of company investors is like, okay, you got to kind of industrialize the process of all of this stuff, right? It's kind of like going from like a bespoke artisanal, like one person made an entire, item of clothing to like, we got to like factory produce this thing, right? And what that means in a organizational context is like, you then create these different fiefdoms, you hire all these execs, and like, each exec kind of like just manages their own swim lane. And there's relatively looser coupling between all of those different groups, right? So that you got sales kind of executing on its own thing, marketing is executing on its own thing, products executing on its own thing. And even within product, there's different product groups and surface areas that are each kind of executing on their own thing. And, using the factory metaphor, like, there's an argument that that's actually kind of an efficient way to scale up production for each of these different swim lanes, right? Like each one can kind of operate, like in a more autonomous and like, purely like scale up, focus kind of way. How do we produce more of this thing? If the thing happens to be within one product group, improving search, that's our main focus. We're just going to, go and ship more stuff to improve search. And so there, it's not completely crazy, like, why people give this advice. But I think what you lose is the magical integrative value of holistic thinking, right? And making the bigger picture bets, right? And I think Brian talked a lot about this on his episode with you, which is like, look, like in a company that is really serious about product, first of all, like, I really liked his point about like the CEO has to play a CPO role, right? You have to care about the product. Like ultimately, like the product is the thing, right? And you can't just coast on scaling up go-to-market around the product forever. Like you got to keep innovating on the product. And by the way, the best way to innovate on the product is not incrementally split over all these different little surface areas, but actually to have like a bigger, kind of more step function vision of how this product needs to make a leap, right? Or what's the next big, like, kind of either act of the product or new capability of the product or reinvention of the product, right? And so, like, I think if you really care about doing that from a product execution standpoint and almost like refinding new product market fit on a regular basis, like I think it necessitates a completely different operating and leadership model throughout the organization. And all of the stuff we just talked about in terms of how to operate in the AI native era, I think is actually exactly the same as how you need to operate in this like constant product market refinding of fit state. So like could not agree more with that concept of, kind of you gotta, think ambitiously and move the organization holistically towards these bigger outcomes, but also like ship and learn and experiment a lot more in this era. And then, maybe the meta learning I had from all of the above is that like, the specific advice obviously was like, okay, go scale up in this way or go hire these types of people, experienced operators, et cetera. And obviously there's some truth to that, right? Like, the people giving this advice are not incompetent. They had some reason for giving it. And in certain contexts, that is the right thing to do. But I think like my meta learning is, it's not enough to just like trust the recommendation, like here's the action you should take from a lot of people, because everybody has different priors. And it's almost like we're all our own LLMs, right? And like we all have different training from a different corpus of data informed by our own experiences. And maybe you're trained on like the kind of ServiceNow or the, kind of Oracle, training corpus, right? And, this person's trained on the Facebook corpus and I'm trained on like, the Airtable one, right? And I think what I've tried to do more and more is like, not just like ignore advice from smart people. Like obviously that's not the right answer, but like to kind of take it's almost like in an LLM, you can now like with a reasoning model, like actually inspect the chain of thought, right? Like, and see how it's thinking. Why did it come up with this answer, right? And to me, that like chain of thought, like why did you recommend this, is actually more informative than the actual like just do this recommendation, right? So the answer might be like, hey, like, at so-and-so company, this is how we eliminated the PM role entirely, right? For Brian, like at Airbnb, like made sense. Like we're no longer having PMs in their traditional form. Now we have program managers and product marketers. But like more than the actual decision, because I don't think it's a one size fits all, like everybody should do the same. Why did you do that, right? And the why actually was very informative. And then be able to take that and say like, okay, like how would I apply that? And maybe it yields a different outcome, but the reasoning actually is very informative.
It's interesting how this idea of founder mode is not so different from this IC-CEO
Yeah,
trend that you're following. And
for sure.
yeah. It's like being in the weeds, being in the details, trying things yourself, not delegating to execs.
Yeah. And like, I think anything taken to an extreme can be problematic, right? So like there is a world where like, you are so in the details and in every detail that you're basically just micromanaging and you're kind of creating like, kind of the euphemism for that. And that's not really what founder mode is about, right? Like that's not like the Brian conception of founder mode is to like micromanage everything and like not trust anyone. But I think it's more about like finding that right balance of being unabashed about caring about the details that do matter and where the tying together of details across different groups or departments actually is the only way to yield a non-incremental outcome. Because otherwise, each person is just optimizing within their own domain, right? But you'll never get to the global maxima or the global breakthrough. And I think like the really cool thing about CEOs as ICs and frankly any leader playing more of an IC like role and being in the details is I think for the right type of person it's actually more fun that way, right? Like I mean to be honest, like for me, like the times where I felt most disintermediated from like what I felt was like the substance of this company was when I thought that I was almost like, forcing myself to step away from the details because I thought that's like what, a at scale CEO was supposed to do, right? Like, I mean, there's, some like, famous CEOs who have talked about like the less decisions I can make, the better, right? Like the less details I'm exposed to, the better, right? Like I just want to inspect at the topmost layer how this business is running. And if everything underneath it is going smoothly, then like I'm able to do that, right? And everything looks good. And I just think that's maybe again, it works in a certain type of very mature type of business. Like, even then though, like I can't imagine that like at a CPG company, like in Procter and Gamble, you wouldn't want to have a CEO who still actually goes and tastes the soup and like tries the products and sees like literally the details of like what the new product innovation pipeline looks like, as well as like how it's being experienced on the shelves and so on. Like, so I don't know. I guess I guess I'm just more and more skeptical that like hands off, pure delegation, and process management role ever works as a CEO. Like maybe you just like you go through a long enough period of like where the business is coasting that like nobody notices. But I gotta say, like for me, like it's just much more invigorating to get to play that role. And I think for the types of operators and leaders that I most admire, like it's like that's what makes the job interesting. Like they don't want to have like a automated away, kind of role as a leader.
If you could go back in time and whisper something in a decade ago Howie's ear that would have saved you a lot of pain and suffering over the last decade, what would that be?
Don't step away from the details that both you love. Like, I mean, first of all, like if your passion is like building product and product design, even if it feels like at times the company needs to do all this other stuff, like scale up, go to market and operations and like just have like a large people organization that itself creates a lot of, kind of, need to do things and manage. And like there becomes a new job invented just to like manage a larger group of people. Right. And like, obviously you're going to have to do some of that. You can't just completely eschew all your responsibility as like a at scale CEO. But like, don't lose the essence of like the thing that you love doing and that, has like really made this product happen, and gives, this company as many companies that like were founded on like a, kind of a magical product market fit finding insight. Don't like step too far away from that. Right. And always make sure that is still your like number one, even if like other stuff has to also add to your plate.
I think people don't talk enough about this, how if someone starts a company, it's an idea they have, they're excited about, it takes off, and then you're stuck on that for a long time. And then even if things are pushed in a direction you're not as excited about. And so this point about just remembering what you actually love about it and coming back to
Yeah.
that is so important because that's the only way to keep doing this for a long time.
I think that's so true. And to me, that's why there's always been a difference between entrepreneurs who love the act of building a product or, the business too, versus those who saw a, just purely business or financial opportunity that they felt like they couldn't pass up exploiting or going after. And look, no knock on people who are more the latter. And like, there's entire industries where like it's all just about alpha generation, right? Like, you can go into the private equity business and so on. And it's just purely, it's rationally about like, how do I find the alpha? And I think that like, some of the best companies, product-centric companies, at least in my opinion, are like, run by those people who like actually just love the product, right? I think you get a feel for that from some of the AI companies like Sam, like I think genuinely just loves like working on AI, right? Like if he could spend 100% of his time on like just being close to the AI and the research, I mean, he would, and he's even said as much, right? Like, but ranging to like the Bryans with Airbnb, like it's pretty clear, that, people like this are not motivated. Like Airbnb was not founded because like, oh my God, we want to make a lot of money off this like arbitrage opportunity against hotels.
They just needed to pay their rent.
Yeah, well, that and like I think they loved the product, and I think they also loved the way in which they built the product, right? Like the design centric nature of that product and company and culture, like and that's what gives you like the continued joy of working on what could be the same company for a very long time.
Howie, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on or leave listeners with before we get to our very exciting lightning round?
I just want to reiterate, especially for listeners here who are in, an E, P, or D role, and especially in the P role, like, I really do believe that this is not like you either have it or you don't, like in terms of the skill set needed to be relevant in AI native. But I do think like it's a call to action to go and bolster your skill sets where they may be, less refined right now, right? Like I think everyone, like even programming, I really believe like everyone could learn how to be a software engineer if they wanted to. Now, like obviously, like some people, just as with like great writers, are never going to be like a published author, right? Or like the Hemingway, right? But like everyone can gain a good enough proficiency of software engineering if they really wanted to. You could take Dev Bootcamp. You could do like some like coding, kind of exercises on the side, etc. And the point there is that like sometimes I think we treat these disciplines like, hard skills that like, if you're already halfway into your career and you're not already an engineer, if you're not already a designer, like, okay, well, you can never be one. And I just think like, our brains are malleable. I think there's a lot of great curriculum out there to learn. And a lot of it, like I said, just comes down to also like trial and error and like building projects, maybe nights and weekends projects, even to learn this stuff. But like, everyone can learn how to be a versatile, kind of unicorn, like product engineer, designer hybrid in the AI native era. And like the only thing stopping you is like just going out and doing it.
That is a really empowering way to end it. And just to double down on that, it's never been easier to learn these things. Like there are super intelligences that you can talk to that do a lot of, like as they're building, can help you learn.
I mean, I go into ChatGPT sometimes and I ask it like, just like, hey, like, how would you build this app? Like, or, like, I'm just curious. I'm like, how would you build Manus, right? Like the agent, open-ended agent, like literally, how would you build it? And you can ask it questions and it's like having like an amazing, brilliant software architect, software engineer, product manager, designer, expert, tutor that you can literally, like, there's no dumb question. They have infinite patience. They're literally on and awake like 24/7. Like it is the most incredible time to like learn this stuff, to your point. And then of course, like the interactive tools to go and actually build stuff, like anyone can download Cursor and just start like asking Composer to generate some code for you, and then looking at the code and trying to figure out what it does. And, to your point, like when I think back to the earliest era that I experienced of building apps, like, first I learned C++, then I learned PHP and JavaScript, and like, even like building, kind of JavaScript, like single page apps in the early days, like '08, through 2010, like it was a dark art. I mean, there were some like, you just had to like go and like learn some of these things. There wasn't great, like, tutorials for it. You had to reverse engineer certain things. Like there were just like weird things. Like if you wanted rounded corners in your UI, you literally took Photoshop opened it up, created like a rounded corner in pixels, and then cut
that.
that pixel up into an image that you dropped onto the page at exactly the right position to be at the edge of like a box. Like crazy stuff, right? I mean, everything was like so much more arcane at the time. And now it's just, it feels so much more fluid and accessible. And like the gap between the arcane tech that you have to wade through to build something has just been minimized so much. It's like the effort and like abstraction between you and like the magical, delightful actual building of the thing that you want has been so minimized. So it's never been a more exciting time to be a builder.
You remember spacer.gif?
Yeah.
It's like to create, like to line stuff, you just kind of have
I
this
remember. Yeah.
invisible 1 pixel thing that you just stick in places.
No.
Oh my God. What a time to be alive. Howie, with that, we've reached our very exciting lightning round. I've got 5 questions for you. Are you ready?
Yes.
Here we go. What are 2 or 3 books you find yourself recommending most to other people?
You know, I've been trying to read fiction more, partly because I think it's just like a really nice mental reset. I will say like Three Body Problem, like for anyone who hasn't read it, like it's a mind expanding book. Like I like sci-fi and fiction that like kind of opens your brain. So maybe this is my cheat card, but you know, it's a 3-book series. those are 3 great books.
I love that series. And my tip there is it gets good. 1.5 books in is my tip. So just keep reading. That's where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
now I'm in.
I liked even the first one.
Okay.
But I do like it. I felt like it was like Inception, where every subsequent book was like you dropped into another, like you incepted into like another layer, right?
Awesome. Okay. What's a favorite recent movie or TV show you've really enjoyed?
TV show, I just started watching The Studio. It's like the Seth Rogen.
Yeah. So stressful.
Yeah, it is very stressful. And you know, I just kind of like, I mean, Silicon Valley was like too close to home, you know, when it came out. So like I watched it, but it was like just cringy. The Studio is kind of fun to watch because like it's a little bit of that like inside baseball of Hollywood, and yet like I'm not in Hollywood, so it's like entertaining to watch. And it's just, you know, I thought smart and funny show, and you know, because I split time between LA and SF, like I also feel like it's very real to me. I see a lot of the like literal characters out there in the world that it's characterizing.
Do you have a favorite product you recently discovered that you really love? Could be an app, could be gadget, could be a clothing.
So okay, so I'll give 2 because I feel like I have to say some kind of software product, right? I mean, I'm a really big fan of Runway, the product and the company. I just think like, you know, every like new model they come out with, they just came out with a new one just I think like 2 days ago, that gives even more like controls and refinement on like creating exactly the video scene that you want. And so like I think just the photorealism in what you can generate now, and like they also built this like cool demo thing that's like an immersive world generator I mentioned before. Like I think it's just cool to see. I also like the underdog story. I'm like clearly like Google's gunning in the space, has VO3 and so on, and like, you know, as is OpenAI. But like I love the underdog story of this like sub 100-person company still punching above their weight and building like really awesome, you know, video experiences, right? So that's the software one. And then a very, very kind of nerdy real world answer on product is I kind of just recently got into like this whole cottage industry of artisanally produced, you know, basically clothing, you know, by like small scale, like Japanese manufacturers that use like literally like 100-year-old looms to make clothes like the old fashioned way, like, you know, or the old fashioned industrial way, right? Like they have these like loop wheeler machines and they spin the cloth in like a very slow pace. So it's completely impractical from like a production scale standpoint. But you know, I've gotten like some of these t-shirts and they like, I just love the, you know, I guess, you know, in a world where it feels like everything is becoming so much faster moving and like, you know, even tech from 5 years ago is obsolete. Like I love a little bit of the throwback to like, you know, old things sometimes can be even more cherishable in this new era, right? So like maybe that makes me a hipster, but like I love the you know, the vintage, the retro increasingly these days.
I feel like anything that starts with artisanal small batch Japanese is going to be really good stuff. Is there a brand you want to share that is that, or is it like you want to keep it
Yeah,
under the
no, I mean,
radar?
actually, so Self Edge, which actually has a storefront, like the main storefront is on Valencia Street in SF. They carry a lot of these items, and like that's kind of their whole MO, and they have like jeans and like t-shirts. So I've gotten a lot of, I mean, they basically curate a really good selection of different actual makers. Like one of them is called Studio d'Artisan. Another one's called, actually, it's cool. There's this company called, I think that the umbrella company is actually just Toyo manufacturing, which sounds like it's a big, like, kind of like large scale conglomerate, but it's anything but. It's like a really small scale Japanese, kind of like vintage manufacturer of clothing. But they have a few sub brands. They actually bought the rights to this like American post-war brand that was kind of like Hanes, like one of the like big like 4 or 5 like kind of menswear, like kind of undershirts and athletic wear brands called Whitesville. I don't know where the name came from, but it basically, it's a bunch of like basic clothing, like t-shirts, etc. And this Japanese indie company basically bought the like defunct, basically name, and now like is reproducing clothes almost made to the exact shape and spec, and even with like the exact recreation of like the graphic packaging on these tees, but like today, right? So I just think there's something really funny and ironic about like they've taken like an American post-war aesthetic and literal brand, but like it's actually like a indie small scale Japanese manufacturing approach to making those clothes.
I feel like we just tapped into what could be a whole other podcast conversation about clothing and
Yeah.
craftsmanship, but I'm going to pull
Yeah.
us out of that.
The next
Oh my God.
podcast franchise.
Or just Howie and Lenny talking about clothing.
Sure.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Do you have a life motto that you often find useful in work or life, share with friends or family?
I stumbled on this this guy, Paul Conti, who I think he's an MD, but also like a psychologist, and he has a book, but also like he did this long form podcast with Andrew Huberman, and he actually ends up talking a lot about like just how to think about like your life outlook and like kind of your framework for thinking about life, but grounded in a kind of like scientific and like kind of neurological and cognitive science basis. And I found one particular point really, really powerful. It stuck with me, which is like, if you live your life in a way that's foundationally built around humility and gratitude, right? And look, like everybody has different circumstances. Like I think like I fully own that, like even though I didn't come from money, like my family was very, very financially modest, like growing up, like I still had an incredible resources and opportunities that afforded to me, even just by virtue of growing up in the US, right? Being born in and growing up in the US, like but also like having access to a computer and the internet, and like even all the free resources I could then access and learn about from there. But like I still feel like whatever you have or don't have to start with, like if you kind of approach the world and kind of the future with a spirit of humility and gratitude rather than, I guess, the opposite of that, it just, I think I've felt like it makes, like, it kind of like becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like you're open-minded, you're kind of grateful, and then like more opportunities actually come your way, right? And maybe it's because of the energy you're putting out into the world, and and other people, and like you're kind of attracting like good opportunities and good people and good things. But I think like there's a lot of other parts of like his framework, but like the one that is easiest to remember is just like, how do I approach each day, even if like I'm going through a tough moment, and maybe we had to like I had to fire somebody today, or maybe like I got disappointed because we lost a customer deal or something broke or whatever, but like to still try to look at the entire situation from an overall feeling of humility and gratitude, I think just really does shift your like it spills over into everything else for that day, and maybe even for like the whole lifetime.
That super resonates. That is Really powerful advice. That's hard to internalize, but important.
Yeah, it's easily said, hard to practice.
Yeah. Where can folks find you? What should they know about Airtable, and how can listeners be useful to you?
Okay, so I am on Twitter, HowieTL. I don't post that much, but I'm a lurker, so I listen and watch, and you can always DM me there. You can also email me directly, howie@airtable.com, anytime if you have ideas, feedback, etc. On Airtable, like, just go try it. Like, the whole point is we want to make this an experiential product, right? Like, that's why we're really leaning into the PLG roots. We talked about, like, the homepage literally says, like, just start building right now. What do you want to build? Go. Like, it starts building. And so use the product, give me feedback. And if you have ideas of your own and you want to rip on them, like, I love, because my passion is thinking about product and, like, product UX, especially in the AI era. If you're working on or thinking about something interesting in that space, like, and even if it's just purely to, like, riff on a concept, like, that's something I enjoy doing, and maybe I get to learn and sharpen my own skill set from. So feel free to reach out. And yeah, I mean, tell your friends and family to try Airtable as well. Like, that's the main thing.
Sounds like you're looking for people to nerd snipe you. And
yes. Yeah.
Howie, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Lenny. This was
Bye,
fun.
everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast. You can find all past episodes or learn more about the show at lennyspodcast.com. See you in the next episode.